Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you, Pipeline Safety Trust, for letting PIPA come up here and give a plug for what we're doing with what is really a long-term way to improve pipeline safety. So we're looking at ways to improve pipeline safety over generations, for the most part, really about mitigation planning. But just by a show of hands, how many of you who are not involved in PIPA could tell me what PIPA stands for? Oh, I'm impressed. Okay, I think I got at least about half of the audience. So Pipelines for Informed Planning Alliance, which is a lot of blah, blah, blah. What does that mean? Well, it's really about land use planning next to transmission pipelines. How can we do that safely? How can we work with our stakeholders to improve the safety adjacent to the pipeline? As you know, operators have responsibilities for what takes place inside the right-of-way, but they don't have the authority to dictate what happens outside the pipelines. But local governments do, and that's where we're looking to bring them into the conversation. So what's PIPA's aim? We're trying to minimize the effects of land development on the pipeline right-of-way. As you can see in this picture, there was an existing pipeline. Development occurred next to it, and now we're at the point where we need to do some type of maintenance, maybe replacement of the pipeline, and you can see just how difficult it is to work safely within the space. There's two main reasons why bringing people close to the pipeline impacts pipeline safety. If you take a look at this, it's a pipeline right-of-way. There's 4 pipelines going through here. The neighborhood has built up alongside, and even though they have really big houses, it's just the American way of life. We want to put another little house in the back so we can put more of our stuff in our yard. So you can see all the different sheds and additional buildings people have put up in the right-of-way. As they're putting these up, there's just more possibility for excavation damage. So the second effect is greater consequence in event of failure. This is a pipeline which was here first, obviously. It was a 10-inch pipeline. It's jet fuel. It operates at 1,200 pounds per square inch, bringing jet fuel to Miami Airport. As you can see how difficult this would be if there was a release in this location to get emergency response equipment to deal with the consequences of a release. So this is what we'd like to see. This is what we're hoping to promote, which is risk-informed land use planning and communication. This was a win-win-win situation. The land developer worked with the government. They've created a green space. They've kept the houses so they don't back up to the green space, which minimizes the amount of possible excavation activities that would take place. Plus, the government gets to control what's happening in that green space as well, because they've created a pathway for the community to bring the community together, too. So PIPA's goal, officially, is to reduce risk and improve safety of affected communities through the implementation of the recommended practices. So let's take a look at what the PIPA report looks like. It was published last December. It's online. It's not meant to be a hard copy that that we would send to you. So if you want it printed, it is printable from the website, but we don't have copies that you can order. How is it broken up? By stakeholders. So there's 4 stakeholder groups: operators, local governments, real estate commission, and the developer public. It starts with a section that describes the risks and benefits of pipelines, and then that's followed by the largest part of the report, which is about 50 recommended practices. After that's the appendices, where you'll see a model ordinance, and Rebecca will be speaking a little bit later about some of the consultation zones ordinances that Pipeline Safety Trust has been working with different local governments in Washington, hopefully. And then there's additional technical information on pipelines. There's also, which I think is really helpful to the public, a matrix that was developed, and this talk about generally acceptable and unacceptable types of activities that can occur on a right-of-way. So say you live next to, or you have a pipeline easement on your property and you're wondering, can I do these type of things? Obviously you need to look at your easement and talk to your operator, but these will give you just in general some ideas of what is possibly acceptable and what will not be acceptable. So what do some of the practices look like? I mean, a lot of times you're, okay, the report's out there, but you haven't had time to look at it. Here's our first one, and it's a baseline. And let me step back for a second. Baseline activities are those which the different stakeholders can take a look at now. They start implementing those so that they are ready for new development when it comes near existing pipelines. And then there's new development practices, and those are the ones that when the new development comes, take a look at those, and you'll want to implement those during that planning process. So obviously this all starts with knowing where the pipelines are. So we're working at making sure that everybody knows that there is access to finding out pipeline location information, whether you're the public. You can look through the public viewer. If you're a local government, you can get some additional information about those pipelines through PIMA. You just log on, give your information, and then you'll be given a password to get into that section. The other area that we're looking at as a team is we're developing our plan to go forward. We're trying to look at a message that will be, I think I heard someone on the panel say yesterday, compelling to local governments for a reason to start looking, well, one, why map the pipelines, and a reason to start looking at PIPA recommended practices. And this is something that you can do today. Take a look at the pipeline and where your housing are. Look at how are you going to get access. If there's a release at any point along that pipeline, how would you get access to it? So one thing we're suggesting is that the operator and the local government sit down together and work, through those emergency response scenarios. You can develop some idea of what you would do in the future when you do get that land development based on sitting down and doing this exercise today. Here's a practice directed at operators. Manage your land records. You've heard a lot of talk about records. Well, these are also very important records to make sure that operators have a good handle on. Make sure your easements are recorded. That is important for constructive notice. And again, this is what's going to continue that pipeline safety across generations. Make sure that people have the information of what is allowed and what is not allowed through that easement. And obviously the other types of land records, you want to make sure that you're managing those. Let me take a sip. Here's another practice for operators, and a lot of transmission operators already do this, but if you don't, these are great practices. Definitely key to damage prevention. When you have your pipelines, especially in high consequence areas, these are some of the activities that are suggested. Pre-excavation meetings, so you probably have already had a pre-construction meeting, but go ahead and have an additional pre-excavation meeting. Make sure that everybody is certain where the location of that pipeline is. If necessary, do some potholing, making small holes to verify that indeed your locates are accurate. And then during excavation, make sure that there's a representative from the operator on site. And of course, remember, pipeline operators are really just a general marker of where that location is. Obviously, you can't dig based on where that pipeline marker is. Here's a recommended practice for the public land developer. Basic concept is, this is one of those points of influence that a planner would have with a land developer. You're going to put this structure somewhere on your site. Put the structure that has the highest density, where people are the most time, furthest away on that piece of property. So if you have a parking lot, make the parking lot closer to the pipeline and the building further away. I know this sounds like common sense, but sometimes until you have somebody point out, I guess, what's the obvious to you, you don't think about it. Well, pipelines are generally safe. Why should I think about where my development is on the land? Well, it's going to lower your risk. And again, buildings are there for a long time. This is how you increase public. This was one of the operators practiced that they recommended. It's something that they currently do. In addition to the pipeline marker, that when there is excavation or any type of construction adjacent to the right-of-way, they also place these temporary right-of-way markers, and they go and they check every day to make sure that the markers are still there. And that's really key. That keeps people from storing materials over your pipeline, and again, it's an additional protection against excavation damage. And finally, we only have one recommended practice for real estate commissions, but it is disclosure of a pipeline when it is in an easement. This would be, obviously there's all types of real estate disclosures currently, so this would just really be one additional one that people are seeing at closing or during the purchase process. So where are we at today? We have the report, we have a logo, and if you want to put that logo on your website, just go to PIPA and it has the directions for you to do that. We have a communication team. We have an awesome communication team. I have to tell you, especially the people who are up here, it's just because everyone else already left. They're actually very fantastic too. But Susan's been great at leading the effort for the operators of thinking of ways to implement these practices for the operators, and a great role model for the industry. And James has been just unfailingly supportive of the effort, and of course Rebecca we're just thrilled to have on the team, and brings a great county and land use and zoning perspective to what's going on. So you probably met some of the other people who are here. Dwayne is here. Dwayne Tesendorf, also from Spectra. Tell me if I get companies wrong. Carl, obviously. Amber Pappas was here from RCP, and Gina Green Slate was here from Panhandle. Did I miss anybody? I think that was everybody who was here. But the team's been very active. We've been having every other week conference calls. We're developing our plan. We actually did have a plan in place, and we've been reworking our plan because we want to make sure that the way that we approach this is compelling to local governments, to make sure that we get the foot in the door, because I think once we start talking to them, it will roll from there. So what have some of our challenges been? Why is it that we decided to change the direction that we're going? Well, we recognize, and I think you've actually heard a lot of that the last couple of days, is pipelines have not really been addressed by a lot of local governments. So they don't have experience. They don't really know, when you come to talk to them, why are you coming to talk to us? It's hard to know who to talk to in a local government, and there are lots of local governments. There's something like 30,000 local governments, where different PIPA practices are aimed at a different role within a local government. That might be one person in smaller governments, but it might be one of 6 different roles. It might be permitting, zoning, your elected official, your public works, your GIS, your planning director. So knowing who to go talk to has also been a challenge for us. And multiply that by, as Susan said, this could be one of many different departments in an operator company of who it is who would implement this practice from an operator standpoint. Currently there's what we have seen so far, pretty low level of awareness of PIPA, even among operators. So one of our objectives is just doing general awareness so that when people hear PIPA, they know what we're talking about. The other thing that happens, and we all say we hope it doesn't happen, but it's human nature, is planning is a priority when something bad happens. And if things are going along well, or it's been a long time since something has happened, it tends not to be a priority. And we need to help planners find ways to integrate planning for pipelines into their routine activities. This can't be an additional add-on to the work that they do. And of course, the timing of the message. So here's a graph of new housing permits in the United States starting back in 1960. And here we are, and you can see the curve rising. The Pipeline Safety Improvement Act of 2002 says PHMSA, FERC, go forth and consider land use planning near transmission pipelines. And from that, 2004, they developed the TRB report, which is what then brought about in 2007 the start of the pipeline team. Well, what happens? Look at what I did. So here we are at a historic over 50-year low of new housing development. So is our message very compelling? Timing's not good, and that's where we are readjusting how we're going to approach different local governments. So we're definitely focusing our communication efforts on local governments. We want to make sure that we're using the terminology that land use planners use. We're trying to understand how different hazard mitigation planning has evolved. So how is land planning near tornado alleys or near floodplains evolved, and learn some lessons through that as well. We want to make sure that we foster good relations. We want to make sure that these discussions are not adversarial. We want to use existing authoritative and trusted communication channels. Obviously, we are all strapped for how many resources we have. We don't need to go out and try and create new channels. We need to find how this information is currently used by the different entities within a local government and work with them. And we want to make sure it's a sustainable path. We are a small group, and everybody except me is a volunteer for the time that they spend on PIPA. So we need to find a way that this will grow arms and legs and continue on into the future. And we recognize also that land planning is evolutionary in a long-term process. I mean, just think back to when people first started saying, maybe we shouldn't build where it floods every year. Well, from that time to people actually not building on it and dealing with the type of things that come along with that, that's a really long process. So we don't see this being a short process either. So our objective first is to raise awareness, get people to map pipelines. We're looking at short-term, tangible, actionable items that they can take. They need a driver. Why is it that we're going to map pipelines? What we're looking at is that ND23 emergency response. Do we have access to the right-of-way? We're hoping that that is the urgent and important message that will compel them. So what type of resources? Please take a look at our website. We have a toolbox. We have all the different documents that have been created. We have a nice brochure, which unfortunately I was hoping, I didn't get that in the package, but in your CD is a copy of the PIPA report. There's also links to the Pipeline Safety Trust has done a number of good support material that local governments can use to help them implement, and also gives a lot of examples of different practices that have been implemented. There is also through the PIPA report at the same time was a discussion document at the national level of what is the risk of pipelines, and recognize this is a national document. So obviously risk is site-specific and operator-specific. So that still needs to be a discussion between the local government and the operator when they're looking at planning. And additionally, different communities have different tolerances for risk. You know, in Texas, maybe they're just much more comfortable. There's much more awareness of pipelines than in a different state. So, of course, you've heard about the TAG grants. I won't go into those. You already know about them. They should be posted in January. They should be open between January and February, and then they'll be awarded next September, October timeframe. So again, thank you for your interest in PIPA. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call me, call any member of the team. And you can see we have all different versions of the logo too, so it looks really nice on your website. Thanks, Rebecca.